Hi, welcome back. The gacha business model is one of the most successful models in gaming history precisely because it plays on your psychology constantly to get you to spend more and more money with tactics like FOMO, power creep, and whatever else the gacha CEOs are cooking up on their mega yachts they bought with our money. But hey, gacha gaming is still gaming, and it's a hobby people spend a lot of money on. While this video is completely for entertainment purposes only, and I do not encourage anybody to spend on gacha games, seriously, please only ever use very expendable income on gacha games. There are some cases where spending money on gacha games is actually pretty damn worth it for what you get when it comes to things like having more fun in the endgame content, for example, despite all the ways these games try to screw you over. So, in this video, is it at all worth it to pull out the wallet and spend your money on gacha games, and which ones are actually the best to spend money on? Well, first of all, the obvious answer is if you've got expendable income, you're playing a gacha game you really like, and there's a character on the banner that you like, pulling out the wallet isn't a bad idea at all. I want to emphasize that no matter what I say in this video, the correct answer for this question will always be your favorite gacha game, and anybody telling you otherwise is stupid. Yes, even if it's Genshin, you're getting good models for spending money now, so it's not all bad. And again, please spend wisely. But there are definitely gacha games where spending money will get you more value than others, and there are many different ways to calculate value of spending in a gacha game, like the gacha system, power creep, cost per pull, bundles, and low spender options like battle passes and monthly passes. There's also game quality, basically how good a game is, which is sort of a similar answer to your favorite gacha game, but a little different. And you also have to take into account what the devs give back for free, and all of these tie into each other, where the best gacha game to spend on will be the game that you like the most, with a rewarding gacha system that can guarantee you a good amount of characters when you spend, that has the most amount of properly challenging content, where preferably your money spent will give you a small advantage that keeps things fun and not annoying or too easy, where your prior investments on old characters don't get thrown into the trash, where the story keeps you engaged with the characters every single patch, and where the devs listen to the community frequently and give back through rewards to keep everyone motivated. I already made a video about gacha systems, and while this video is made for F2P players in mind, basically every ranking becomes quite obviously a bit higher for low spenders when taking characters all at the same value, and disregarding team requirements and power creep, which don't worry, we'll look at these in a bit too. It's the least worth it to spend on games like Dragon Ball Legends and Fate Grand Order with insanely high guarantees, since if you get unlucky you'd have to spend quite a bit just to guarantee the current characters. Then it becomes more and more worth it when you go from Genshin to Wuthering Waves to Enfield to then insane gacha systems like Arknights and then the Goat Limbus Company, especially when low spending can guarantee you all characters without dupes in so many of these games. While a game like Genshin Impact guarantees F2P players around 1 5-star 50-50 pity every single patch on average, low spenders can expect a bit more than that. When taking the average low spender player, you can probably get a limited 5-star character and possibly their weapon each patch if you don't get too unlucky, but guaranteeing that would take more than just things like the Welkin and Battle Pass. Meanwhile, low spending in Wuthering Waves, Zenless Zone Zero, and Honkai Star Rail will instead most likely guarantee you a character and a weapon every patch, since they give more F2P currency than Genshin every patch and have either a better weapon system or just a whole slightly better gacha system in Wuthering Waves. Wuthering Waves also has the dupe shop, which low spenders and especially those looking to vertically invest can rely on pretty heavily for dupes. And then in a game like Arknights Enfield with a much lower hard guarantee and mostly free weapon currency, you can probably get every single character and weapon. However, if you only get the monthly pass and battle pass, you won't be guaranteed every single character and weapon because there's just under enough to get 120 pulls every character banner, except when it's a 1 6-star patch like the current one. Just remember that in Enfield you actually only need around 100 real pulls worth of ore barrels every banner to get every character because of the dossiers and expiring tickets, and again, while weapons are half free for F2P players, weapons are almost fully free for low spenders, unless you get bitch slapped every single weapon banner and go to pity every time, or keep getting super lucky on character banners. You will be getting every single signature weapon, otherwise there's the battle pass. And bundles in these games can make spending even more worth it when combined with things like the monthly pass and battle pass, reducing cost per pull in most cases from $2 to $1.50. Games with more of these bundles will always be better to spend on than games with less of these because you can get more for the same amount of money. The quality of the battle pass is also something to consider, with Enfield easily having the best battle pass of the big gacha games, 2 tiers being free and the paid one providing an extra alternate signature weapon over the one in the second tier, an alternate signature weapon dupe as well, and arsenal tickets. But these big gacha games are also nothing compared to games higher up on the gacha system list when it comes to priority of low spending. Low spending and super generous games with great gacha systems like Arknights and Reverse 1999 can pretty much guarantee you every single character, especially since you're also not spending anything on weapons in these games, and especially in a game like Limbus Company, the game with the best battle pass of all gacha games of all time, where you can pretty relatively easily guarantee every single character in the game when you get the battle pass. Unless I miss some niche gacha game like Moramens or something that has a much better battle pass, let me know. But of course, gacha systems aren't everything. People usually spend on gacha games for the endgame content, and things like power creep, character shilling, HP inflation, and older characters becoming irrelevant is definitely something to consider when spending on a gacha game. And while I say this, I will also say that the power creep issue in both of these two games is one of the most overblown issues of all time, despite me peddling the HSR power creep issue for the longest time. But because these two games have insanely tribalistic communities that will latch onto anything just to hate on each other, but in Honkai Star Rail, even its own players hate the balance in that game, so it's obvious which one has it worse. In Arknights Enfield, spending a bit of extra money to get a character will give you much more value over the long term, since this character won't be shielded in the current endgame content, then thrown out of the window a few weeks to months later when they're no longer being sucked off by the devs. And I'm definitely not saying here that you cannot clear with old units in either HSR or WoA. I'm simply saying that some of these games have insane shell problems that make characters less worth it in the long run, especially when new characters drop that are way stronger than old characters, making the shell issue even worse. In Enfield, that simply doesn't happen, despite it remaining true that characters like Arcane are stronger DPS units than Lavataine, although Arcane obviously still makes Lavataine way stronger since she is easily Lavataine's most valuable support unit. Don't let people who have an agenda hide that fact from you, and I am making a video about Enfield's supposed power creep soon. And when we talk about support units, spending on a unit like Summer Robin, who's going to be one of the most versatile units in Honkai Star Rail so far, is much more worth it than spending on a unit like Camille, who's only really good for Rosie and Lavataine. You can pretty quickly see that it gets very complicated to calculate the value of this kind of thing, especially when it comes to teams. In Wuthering Waves, characters can have super specific teams, and spending on only one part of the equation when the other one or two are missing would be way less valuable than spending on a character in another game that has way more team options. But of course, I'm not making any blanket statements here, and as I said, spending on different units in the same game can have different values, so don't give me some example of why Unit A in WoA is better to spend on than Unit B in Enfield, because when taking the average, Arknights Enfield characters are gonna be much more worth it and will help you clear endgame content for a lot longer time than games with a similar design philosophy to WoA and HSR, since timer-filled DPS check endgame content is designed around making older units less viable over time and shilling newer units to make them feel more powerful than they really are before tossing them to the curb when they're not being shilled anymore. And you can apply the exact same logic I'm talking about here to genuinely any game. Games where characters have much longer lifespans than the endgame content or the game as a whole are more valuable and give a larger return on investment than games where the characters get thrown to the curb pretty hard eventually. Even Fate Grand Order, a game where I said you shouldn't spend on because the guarantee is so high, is really good about this sort of thing. And again, even in the same game, there can be huge differences in value. I'd spend on E2 Summer Robin way sooner than I'd spend on trying to get E2 Herda or something. But now, when talking about endgame content, spending money specifically to clear the endgame content in Enfield has to be one of the least worth it things of all time, because the content in this game does not at all ask of you to have any specific character. So far, you can clear the content with whatever you want. Even stages with mechanics that heavily punish physical teams, for example, are still fully clearable with physical teams because the content isn't on a timer-based reward system and just requires you to survive or be destroyed. It's much more skill-based, and even then, Arknights Enfield does not have constantly available content for you to clear, so spending money specifically for the endgame content would be less worth it than other games where you're not constantly getting the dopamine hit from testing out your newly purchased unit. So then, spending money to clear the endgame content in a game like Honkai Star Rail and Wuthering Waves is much more worth it just because the endgame content in these games is much less skill-focused and much more character-focused, and is also much more available. And now, speaking of Summer Robin's E2, dupes are also a huge point of debate. I would never pull out the wallet specifically to get a dupe of a character in Arknights Enfield, because dupes in this game are very weak, and that is a very good thing for F2P players, since you're never urged to spend extra on one character to vertically invest into them. However, on the other side of that coin, it does make spending money in that game for dupes specifically less worth it. It's a good money-saving tactic, but you'll also notice how there are a lot less whales in a game like Enfield compared to every other game. Even some whales quit whaling entirely precisely because not only are dupes not powerful enough, but as we said, there's no endgame content where you would benefit from dupes so much like you would in other games. And no, it's not because whaling in Enfield is expensive at all, and don't get started. Getting E1 or E2 Summer Robin Honkai Star Rail would give you a huge return on investment because of how versatile and powerful that unit is. Actually, watch them power creep or somehow in 5.7, but yes, in a game like Honkai Star Rail, vertical investment is super worth it to delay characters getting power crept, but they will eventually get power crept, unless we also talk about character buffs. The two biggest examples I can think of when talking about games having power creep, but also buffing up older characters are Reverse 1999 and Honkai Star Rail, and we won't talk about Dragon Ball Legends because spending on that game always sucks. We obviously know all about Honkai Star Rail and their Nova Flares, and even though they should most definitely be way more frequent, like holy shit, give me the Acheron Nova Flare already, and even though they have been super hit or miss, they can revive some characters from the dead like Black Swan and Kafka. And while I don't want to talk too much about Reverse 1999's meta since I'm not very good at it, and Reverse 1999 it's even more worth it since character buffs happen more often, buffed characters get special rerun banners, and on top of all of that, the game is much more generous with the gacha system, currency, and free units which we discussed earlier. And to stay on this topic, generosity is another huge factor when it comes to spending, since being rewarded when you don't spend in a game feels really good and makes it feel more worth it. I would much sooner spend on Honkai Star Rail and Reverse 1999 than Wuthering Waves when it comes to this, because Wuthering Waves is really bad at giving free 5 stars even at anniversaries, where a game like Reverse 1999 is currently having one of the best anniversaries I've seen in 2026. I logged on and pressed 2 buttons and got a new unit with a dupe. Games like Reverse 1999 and Arknights that give you so much for playing them, both rewards-wise and also when it comes to story content and gameplay, are definitely worth it to spend money on, especially when the games drop new modes like Reverse 1999 did in 3.7. Now again, you can obviously call any game your favorite game because you really like it and spend on it over any other gacha game, but when you're a person like me, have a channel like me, I'd rather spend my money on games that have good endgame content, are the most F2P accessible so I can support the devs to continue making an F2P accessible product, and have the most worth it gacha systems when spending, like Enfield, Reverse 1999, Limbus Company, Arknights, and every other game I've glazed. Then I spend a tiny bit of money on games with gameplay I enjoy like Wuthering Waves and Honkai Star Rail, so low spending on gacha games is a great way to both get a lot of value and not break the bank, and while you could spend say $30 a month low spending on 3 different gacha games, you could also spend $30 on an indie game, or $60 to $70 on a AAA game that isn't GTA 6 and probably cost $90 to $100. Gacha games are really only morally bad because the devs keep pushing you to spend, but when it's worth it in a game that doesn't eat you alive and give you tons of value, the fun factor you can get from gacha games is definitely worth that $15 you spent every month on a battle pass and monthly pass in your favorite game. But at the same time, non-gacha or live service games don't have daily incentive for you to play them all the time, they don't push you to spend money other than on DLCs in most games, and so that's why most people see them as more worth it while demonizing gacha games, which obviously can be horribly predatory in many cases, with whales spending insane amounts of money that some of them might not have, which they obviously wouldn't have on a non-gacha game. So please, another reminder to spend very wisely, it is never worth it to drop $100 whole you should have spent on food or bills, especially in this economy, just for a chance at a 2D or 3D anime waifu. So thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and join the Express Train Discord server for a fun and lovely community to hang out with. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time.